So now we're going to start diving into the different stages of the UVD template, and this video is going to be focused on stage one of the UVD template, which is focuses on desired results. So here it is in its glory. So I mentioned in the previous video that this entire unit is a driver's education unit. So everything you'll see here, from the standards to the goals, will all focus on helping students be competent, confident drivers. So the first thing I'll draw your attention to is on the left-hand side, we have underneath content standards, a list of standards that were indicated on this template. Notice too that the code for the standards is also here. That's really important because as you're developing your unit and then developing your goals, you really want to make sure that you can match your standards to each one of your goals. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Now, there's a ton of standards out there for your course, probably. And so it's kind of like, how do I choose which standards to focus on? Some things to think about when choosing standards for your units would be which standards have endurance beyond a single test date. So those standards will help kids in the long run. What standards could we leverage in other disciplines? So if you know that, for instance, writing a CER is a big part of your course and there are standards related to that, it might also benefit students. That argumentation might benefit students in other courses as well. And then finally, what standards are necessary for students to be ready for the next level of learning? So maybe the next unit, maybe the end of the school year, or maybe the next course up. What will help students really attend to that next level of learning? So once we've chosen our standards, we want to dive into our goals. So at the very top of this unit map, you will see transfer goals. And transfer goals are basically like, what do we want students to be able to do in the long term beyond our class? What will we want students to be able to combine all their knowledge, their skill, their understanding to be able to do in the long run? So this section is always starts off with students will be able to independently use their learning too. And then we might list like one, two, maybe three transfer goals that we want students to be able to do in the long run. So this unit developer wants students after the course to be able to drive courteously and defensively without accidents or needless risk, and to be able to adapt their knowledge of safe driving to various traffic, road, and weather conditions. So since they want their students to be able to do these two things in the long run, it really drives how they construct the rest of their goals, because all of the rest of the goals should kind of filter up so that students should be able to drive courteously and defensively, and then adapt what they're able to do for different conditions. So once you figure out the long-term goals of your unit that you'll be able to measure at the very end of the unit, you want to start thinking about what understanding goals might we have for students. So we spent a ton of time on our first PD day talking about what is knowledge versus understanding. And here's where we list those generalizations that we want students to be able to make during the course of the unit. One key thing to notice is that this section always starts with students will understand that. And you really want to have that word that in there because it forces you, the unit designer, to write your understanding goals as generalizations. So students will understand that a motor vehicle can become a lethal weapon and driving one demands constant attention. That shows specifically what we want students to understand by the end of the unit. It's not like really general and like wishy-washy. It is very clear what that generalization that we want students to make is. Something that goes along with understanding goals are essential questions. And these are these open-ended, thought-provoking questions that students will ask themselves during the course of the entire unit. They'll keep considering them. And by considering these understanding goals throughout the whole unit, it helps them eventually come to these generalizations. So what makes a courteous and defensive driver? Well, if students consistently think about that question, they might come to the understanding that they have to be able to adapt their driving so they're safe and courteous. They have to be a defensive driver so that they can anticipate if something comes up that they're ready to like respond to that safely. So again, thinking about these essential questions during the learning will help students come to these understandings. Finally, the last set of goals are these acquisition goals. And the acquisition goals are just skills and knowledge. These are things that are directly taught to students. So knowledge goals always start with students will know, and you just basically list what you want students to know. So we want students to know basic car parts and functions. We want them to know the driving laws and rules of the road for their jurisdiction. So it's just things that we would directly teach students, declarative knowledge. Skills are more procedural, and these are things that students will be able to do, and these can also be directly taught. For instance, I could show a student how to adjust the driver's seat and car mirrors, and that's an isolated skill that they'll be able to perform. I could directly teach students how to signal their intentions or merge into traffic on a highway. So once we've planned all of our goals, one thing to consider first off is that do all of your goals connect to your standards? So remember how I mentioned toward the beginning of this video that you want to make sure your actual standard code is here? You want to be able to tag all of your goals to make sure that each goal here connects to one of these standards. And you want to make sure that you don't have any extra standards here that aren't being attended to. Another big thing to keep in mind that I referenced briefly at the beginning of this video is that you want all of your goals to flow up to transfer. So everything I'm teaching should help students drive courteously and defensively without accidents or needless risk. And it should also help them adapt their knowledge of safe driving to various traffic, road, and weather conditions. So by knowing all of this information and being able to perform all these skills, and by students coming to these generalizations and understandings, that will help students successfully transfer their learning to an entirely new context, something that's unfamiliar to them, so they can show, do they really know these things, can do these things, and have these understandings.